In the heart of a vibrant city, where tourists flocked to marvel at historic landmarks and grand architecture, stood the royal palace, a symbol of tradition and pride. Outside its gates, Corporal James Harrington took his position as one of the iconic royal guards. Clad in his striking red tunic, black trousers, and a towering bearskin hat, he was an image of discipline and strength. His polished boots gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting his dedication to duty. James wasn't just another face in the line of ceremonial guards. He was known for his unwavering focus and calm demeanor. Tourists often stopped to take pictures with him, their laughter filling the air as they posed beside his statuesque figure. Children giggled, pointing at his towering hat, while parents reminded them not to touch it. It was part of the uniform that represented centuries of service and honor. Despite the constant attention, James remained still, his eyes fixed ahead, embodying the essence of his role. The square buzzed with life that day. Street performers entertained passersby, musicians played cheerful tunes, and vendors sold snacks to hungry visitors. It was a scene of joy and harmony, but amidst the cheer, there were always those who disrupted the peace. Enter Victor Langley, a man whose presence seemed to cast a shadow over everything around him. Known locally for his sharp tongue and prejudiced views, Victor carried himself with an air of entitlement. He despised authority figures, especially those in uniforms like James, which he believed represented values he didn't agree with. Victor strolled into the square, his posture rigid and his expression sour. His large German shepherd trotted obediently by his side, its muscular frame exuding power. The dog was trained well, but it mirrored its owner's aggression, growling softly whenever someone came too close. As Victor approached the royal guard, his lips curled into a sneer. For him, this wasn't just another walk through the city. It was an opportunity to assert dominance, to prove a point no one had asked him to make. James, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the brewing storm. His training taught him to block out distractions and stay focused on his task, protecting the palace and maintaining order. But even he couldn't ignore the shift in energy as Victor drew nearer. The once lively chatter dimmed slightly, replaced by uneasy glances from bystanders who recognized the troublemaker. A few people whispered warnings to each other, urging friends and family to steer clear of the impending confrontation. Despite the growing tension, James held his ground. His breathing stayed steady, his gaze unwavering. Years of rigorous training had prepared him for moments like these, not just physically, but mentally. He knew that being a royal guard wasn't just about standing tall in ceremonial attire. It was about embodying resilience, patience, and dignity. Little did he know, however, that today would push all three virtues to their limits. As Victor stopped a few feet away, his piercing glare locked onto James. The crowd instinctively formed a loose circle around them, sensing that something was about to happen. Some pulled out their phones, ready to capture whatever unfolded next. Others simply watched, holding their breath. What started as an ordinary day in the square was about to become anything but, and everyone present could feel it. Victor Langley wasted no time making his presence known. With a smug grin, he planted himself directly in front of Corporal James Harrington, his arms crossed and his stance deliberately confrontational. The dog at his side growled low, its hackles rising as if sensing its owner's hostility. Victor leaned in slightly, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's the matter, soldier? Too scared to look me in the eye?" He spat, his tone loud enough to draw even more attention from the onlookers. James, however, didn't rise to the bait. His training had drilled into him the importance of maintaining composure, no matter how provocative the situation became. He kept his gaze fixed ahead, his expression unreadable. To the casual observer, he might have seemed like a statue carved out of stone, but inside, his mind was sharp and alert. Every fiber of his being told him to ignore the taunts, to let them bounce off like rain against glass. Yet there was something unsettling about the way Victor carried himself, like he wasn't done yet. "Come on, tough guy," Victor continued, pacing back and forth in front of James. You're supposed to be protecting this place, right? So why don't you protect yourself for once? His words were laced with venom, each syllable designed to chip away at James' resolve. Tourists exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether they should intervene or simply stay out of it. A few brave souls stepped forward slightly, ready to call for help if things escalated further. But Victor wasn't content with verbal jabs alone. He wanted chaos. He craved it. Reaching down, he unclipped the leash from his German shepherd's collar, letting it drop to the ground with a metallic clink. The dog immediately perked up, its ears twitching as it scanned the scene. Victor pointed a finger toward James and gave a sharp command. "Go get him." Without hesitation, the massive animal lunged forward, barking ferociously as it charged toward the guard. The crowd gasped collectively, some stepping back in fear while others froze in shock. Children clung to their parents, and phones were raised higher to capture the unfolding drama. For a moment, it seemed like time stood still. Would James retaliate? Could he defend himself without breaking protocol? The questions hung heavy in the air as the dog closed the distance between them, its teeth bared and its eyes locked onto its target. Yet, amidst the pandemonium, James remained eerily calm. His years of training kicked in, reminding him that panic would only make the situation worse. Instead of reaching for his weapon or shouting commands, he focused on controlling his breathing. Each inhale and exhale steadied not just his body, but also his racing thoughts. He knew that reacting impulsively could turn the encounter deadly, not just for him, but for everyone around him. And so, he chose to wait, watching the dog's movements carefully, searching for a way to diffuse the tension without resorting to violence. Victor, meanwhile, watched with a mix of satisfaction and curiosity. He had expected James to flinch, to yell, or perhaps even strike back. But instead, the guard stood rooted to the spot, seemingly unfazed by the snarling beast now circling him. Frustration flickered across Victor's face. This wasn't going according to plan. His attempt to humiliate the guard was falling apart, and he couldn't understand why. What kind of man could remain so composed in the face of such blatant aggression? As the moments stretched on, the atmosphere grew heavier. The dog continued to bark and snap, its powerful jaws mere inches from James' legs. Yet the guard didn't move an inch. It was as if he had become part of the very foundation of the palace itself, unshakable, immovable. The crowd, initially fearful, began to shift their focus. Murmurs rippled through the gathering, some expressing admiration for James' restraint, others condemning Victor's cruelty. Cameras clicked and videos rolled, capturing every second of the surreal standoff. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning. James' next move would leave everyone stunned, not because of its boldness, but because of its simplicity. The dog's barks echoed through the square, sharp and relentless, as it circled James with predatory intent. Its teeth gleamed in the sunlight, its growls vibrating through the air like a warning siren. Every movement it made was calculated, every snap of its jaws a reminder of its power. The crowd held their breath, some clutching their children closer, while others whispered prayers under their breath. For a moment, it felt as though the entire world had stopped spinning. All eyes were on the royal guard and the snarling beast before him. James could feel the tension radiating from the people around him. He heard the faint rustle of fabric as someone shifted nervously behind him. He saw flashes of light as cameras captured the scene from every angle. But none of that mattered. His focus was singular: the dog. Despite its aggressive stance, James noticed something else, a flicker of uncertainty in its eyes. Dogs, after all, are not born hateful. They act based on instinct and the energy projected by those around them. And right now, the dog was feeding off Victor's anger, mirroring his hostility. Inside, James wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to lash out, to defend himself against this blatant attack on his dignity and safety. Another part reminded him of who he was, a representative of discipline, honor, and peace, Reacting violently would only escalate the situation, potentially putting innocent bystanders at risk. More importantly, it would give Victor exactly what he wanted, a reason to claim victory over someone he deemed inferior. So, instead of raising his voice or reaching for his weapon, James did something unexpected. Slowly, deliberately, he crouched down. The motion was smooth, almost graceful, as if he were performing a well-rehearsed routine rather than facing an imminent threat. His knees bent slightly, his weight evenly distributed, and his gloved hands rested lightly on his thighs. The crowd murmured in confusion. What was he doing? Wasn't this dangerous? Surely, moving even an inch would provoke the dog further. But James didn't stop there. With measured precision, he removed one of his pristine white gloves, revealing his bare hand beneath. Then, without breaking eye contact with the dog, he extended his arm outward, palm facing up. "Easy now," he said softly, his voice calm but firm. It wasn't loud enough to startle the animal, but it carried a sense of authority that commanded attention. For a brief second, the dog hesitated. Its ears twitched, and its barking softened into a low rumble. The crowd fell silent, watching in awe as the massive German shepherd paused mid-circle, its gaze locked onto James' outstretched hand. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as man and beast faced each other, neither making a sudden move. Finally, the dog lowered its head slightly, sniffing cautiously at James' palm. When it found no threat, no aggression, it relaxed its stance entirely, sitting back on its haunches as though waiting for further instruction. Victor, who had been watching with a smug grin, suddenly looked uneasy. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had expected chaos, outrage, maybe even a physical altercation. Instead, the very thing he had unleashed to intimidate James had been calmed in mere moments, not through force, but through patience and understanding. His jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists as he realized the tables had turned. The crowd, however, erupted into applause. Cheers rang out from every direction, echoing off the stone walls of the palace. Strangers patted James on the shoulder as they passed, thanking him for his bravery and composure. Even the street performers nearby tipped their hats in respect. What had started as a tense and terrifying moment had transformed into something extraordinary, a display of humanity triumphing over hatred. As James rose back to his full height, his glove dangling loosely from his fingers, he allowed himself a small, satisfied exhale. He hadn't won the day through strength or aggression. He had done it by choosing compassion over conflict. And though Victor still stood nearby, glaring daggers, it was clear who had truly come out on top. As the applause from the crowd began to die down, a profound silence settled over the square. All eyes were now on James and Victor, two men standing at opposite ends of a spectrum, calm versus chaos, dignity versus disdain. The German shepherd, now calm and seated beside James, seemed almost like a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Its earlier aggression had melted away, replaced by a quiet obedience that mirrored the guard's composed demeanor. Victor, however, was far from ready to concede defeat. His face flushed red with anger and humiliation, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He glared at James, searching for some crack in the guard's armor, a flicker of fear, a sign of weakness, but found none. Instead, he saw only unwavering confidence, an unspoken challenge to his entire worldview. For the first time in years, Victor felt powerless. His plan to humiliate the guard had backfired spectacularly, leaving him exposed in front of dozens of strangers. James, sensing the shift in energy, decided it was time to address Victor directly. Though protocol dictated silence during his post, this situation called for something more. Lowering his voice but ensuring it carried enough weight to be heard, he spoke clearly and evenly. "Sir," he began, his tone respectful yet firm, "your dog responds better to kindness than hostility." There was no malice in his words, no attempt to provoke or belittle. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the same poise that had calmed the animal moments before. The crowd erupted again, this time not just with applause, but with cheers and whistles. People clapped enthusiastically, their admiration for James palpable. Some even shouted words of encouragement. "Well said." And, "You tell him." Victor, caught off guard by both the guard's words and the public reaction, took a step back. His bravado faltered as he realized the tide had turned against him. No longer was he the center of attention. Instead, he had become the villain in a story where compassion had triumphed over hate. Furious and desperate to regain control, Victor tried to pull the dog away, tugging harshly on its collar. But the animal resisted, refusing to budge. It remained seated beside James, its loyalty momentarily shifting to the man who had shown it kindness. This small act of defiance sent another ripple of laughter through the crowd, further humiliating Victor. His face twisted in frustration as he yanked harder, finally managing to drag the reluctant dog a few steps backward. Yet, the damage was done. Everyone present could see that even his own pet had chosen peace over aggression. Dr. Elena Carter, a behavioral psychologist who happened to be among the onlookers, watched the scene unfold with keen interest. She had been observing human behavior for decades, studying how people react under pressure, but rarely had she witnessed such a striking example of de-escalation. James' ability to remain calm, assertive, and empathetic in the face of blatant provocation was nothing short of remarkable. As the crowd dispersed, still buzzing with excitement, Elena approached James cautiously, mindful of protocol. "Excuse me, Corporal Harrington," she said softly, careful not to interrupt his duties. James turned slightly, acknowledging her presence with a polite nod. "My name is Dr. Elena Carter. I'm a psychologist specializing in conflict resolution." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What you just did, it was extraordinary. I'd love to discuss it further, perhaps collaborate on workshops aimed at teaching these techniques to others." At first, James hesitated. Collaborating with a civilian expert wasn't part of his usual responsibilities, and he wasn't sure if stepping into such a role would be appropriate. But then he thought about the countless interactions he'd witnessed over the years, between law enforcement officers, civilians, and authority figures, and how many of them ended in unnecessary conflict. If sharing his experience could help prevent similar incidents in the future, wasn't it worth considering? With a thoughtful expression, James nodded slowly. "I appreciate your offer, ma'am," he replied. "Let's talk more after my shift." Elena smiled warmly, knowing she had just taken the first step towards something transformative. Meanwhile, Victor slunk away, dragging his dog behind him, his head bowed in shame. The once arrogant man disappeared into the crowd, his moment of infamy captured forever on video. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the square, James returned to his post, resuming his position with quiet pride. Though the incident was over, its impact lingered, not just for those who had witnessed it, but for James himself. In choosing kindness over retaliation, he had proven that true strength lies not in dominance, but in humanity. And in doing so, he had set the stage for something greater, a legacy of understanding, unity. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. By the time James' shift ended and he stepped away from his post, videos of the confrontation had already gone viral on social media. Clips of Victor's aggressive behavior juxtaposed with James' calm demeanor were being shared thousands of times, accompanied by hashtags like #KindnessWins and #StrengthenCompassion. People from all over the world praised the Royal Guard for his composure and humanity, while condemning Victor's actions as cowardly and cruel. The next morning, news outlets picked up the story, turning it into headlines that dominated breakfast conversations. "Royal Guard wins hearts by calming aggressive dog," read one article. Another proclaimed, "How a single act of grace shamed hate." Journalists flocked to the palace grounds, hoping to catch an interview with James or anyone who had witnessed the event. Tourists arrived in even larger numbers than usual, eager to see the famous guard whose actions had inspired so many. James, however, remained humble. When reporters approached him during his break later that day, he politely declined to comment extensively, citing his commitment to duty. "I was simply doing my job," he said with a modest smile. "And I believe kindness is always stronger than hate." His words resonated deeply, striking a chord with people who felt weary of division and conflict in their own lives. Meanwhile, Victor Langley faced the full weight of public backlash. The video of his behavior painted him in an unflattering light, and soon his name became synonymous with prejudice and poor judgment. Employers distanced themselves from him, colleagues avoided him, and even friends began to question their association with him. Within days, he lost his job, a casualty of the very arrogance that had driven him to provoke James in the first place. Isolated and disgraced, Victor retreated from public view, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked hostility. Back at the palace, James met with Dr. Elena Carter to discuss her proposal for collaboration. They found a quiet corner near the square where they could talk without interruptions. Over coffee, Elena explained her vision: a series of workshops designed to teach de-escalation techniques not only to law enforcement officers, but also to civilians. She believed that if more people learned how to respond to aggression with empathy, incidents like the one involving Victor could be prevented, or at least resolved peacefully. "I'm not asking you to abandon your responsibilities," Elena assured him. "But think about it. Your actions yesterday reached millions of people. Imagine what we could achieve if we shared those lessons systematically, helping others handle difficult situations with the same grace you showed." James listened intently, weighing her words. He knew firsthand how tense encounters could escalate quickly, whether on the streets or in everyday life. If sharing his experience could help someone else stay safe or prevent harm, it was worth exploring. "All right," he said finally, nodding. "Let's give it a try, but let's make sure it stays focused on practical solutions, not just theory." Elena beamed, thrilled by his willingness to participate. Together, they began drafting plans for the first workshop, tentatively titled Unity in Action. The program would combine role-playing exercises, real-life case studies, and interactive discussions aimed at fostering mutual respect between communities and authority figures. It was ambitious, but both James and Elena believed it could make a difference. As word of their collaboration spread, support poured in from unexpected places. Local leaders offered venues for the workshops. Businesses donated resources, and volunteers signed up to assist. Even members of the royal family expressed interest, praising James' initiative and offering to promote the project through official channels. What had started as a single act of courage was now blossoming into something far greater, a movement rooted in compassion and understanding. For James, this newfound responsibility felt daunting yet exhilarating. He realized that his role extended beyond guarding a palace. He was now a symbol of hope for people seeking ways to bridge divides. And though he never sought fame or recognition, he embraced the opportunity to inspire change, one kind gesture at a time. The first workshop under the banner of Unity in Action took place just 3 weeks after the viral incident. Held in a spacious community center not far from the palace, it attracted a diverse group of participants: police officers, teachers, social workers, and even ordinary citizens who wanted to learn how to handle conflict better. The room buzzed with anticipation as attendees filed in, clutching notebooks and pens, eager to hear what Corporal James Harrington had to say. James stood at the front of the room, dressed in plain clothes instead of his ceremonial uniform. Without the towering hat or red tunic, he looked more approachable, almost like any other person in the crowd. Yet there was an undeniable air of authority about him, a quiet confidence that commanded respect. Beside him stood Dr. Elena Carter, her warm smile putting everyone at ease as she introduced the session. "Today isn't about lectures or rules," Elena began, addressing the audience. "It's about learning practical tools you can use in real-life situations, and no one is better suited to teach us than Corporal Harrington, whose actions remind us that compassion is always stronger than aggression." James stepped forward, nodding gratefully at Alina before speaking. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I'll be honest, I didn't expect my life to change because of something I did on duty, but sometimes small moments have big impacts. Today we're going to focus on those moments, how to stay calm under pressure, how to read people and animals, and most importantly, how to choose kindness when it feels hardest." With that, the workshop kicked off. James started by recounting the day Victor set his dog on him, describing every detail, the tension in the square, the dog's aggressive posture, and the split-second decisions he made to defuse the situation. As he spoke, the audience hung onto his every word, their faces reflecting a mix of admiration and curiosity. When he explained how he crouched down and extended his hand to the dog, several attendees nodded knowingly, while others scribbled notes furiously. Next came the interactive part of the workshop. Alina guided the group through role-playing exercises designed to simulate high-stress scenarios. Participants took turns playing different roles: a belligerent stranger, a panicked parent, or even an angry pet owner, to practice responding with empathy rather than hostility. James walked around the room, offering advice and encouragement. "One thing I've learned," he told a young police officer struggling to keep his composure during a mock argument, "is that listening is just as important as speaking. Sometimes people lash out because they feel unheard. If you can show them you're willing to listen, half the battle is won." By lunchtime, the energy in the room was electric. Attendees shared stories of their own experiences with conflict, discussing what they'd done right and where they could improve. A teacher recounted calming a disruptive student by simply sitting next to them instead of yelling. A shopkeeper described diffusing a heated argument between customers by offering free coffee and a sincere apology. Each story reinforced the central theme of the workshop. Small acts of kindness can transform tense situations into opportunities for connection. As the day wore on, James and Alina introduced another key element of the program: teamwork. They emphasize that de-escalation isn't always a solo effort. Having allies who share your values can make all the difference. To demonstrate this, they paired participants together for collaborative problem-solving activities. One exercise involved working as a team to guide a lost tourist, played by an actor, back to safety using only nonverbal cues. Laughter filled the room as groups experimented with gestures, facial expressions, and body language to communicate effectively. By the end of the day, the atmosphere was celebratory. Participants exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch and support each other's efforts to spread kindness in their communities. Several approached James personally to thank him, their gratitude evident in their eyes. "You've given me hope," said one elderly woman, tears glistening on her cheeks. "I thought the world was getting colder, but now I see there are still good people trying to make it better." For James, the day was both exhausting and fulfilling. He hadn't realized how much he needed this, not just to share his experience, but to connect with others who shared his vision. As he packed up his materials alongside Alina, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about workshops or techniques. It was about creating ripples of change that could reach corners of society he might never see. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, these ripples could grow into waves. The success of the first workshop marked the beginning of something extraordinary. Word of unity and action spread rapidly, fueled by glowing testimonials from participants and media coverage that highlighted its impact. Requests poured in from cities across the country, and eventually around the world, for James and Alina to bring their program to new communities. What had started as a local initiative soon evolved into a global movement, inspiring people from all walks of life to confront prejudice and conflict with understanding. James became a sought-after speaker, invited to conferences, schools, and community events. Standing on stages far larger than the cozy community center where it all began, he shared his story with audiences numbering in the thousands. Each speech was infused with humility and wisdom, offering practical advice, while reminding listeners that true strength lies in choosing peace over retaliation. "Every act of kindness matters," he often said, his voice resonating through auditoriums. Even the smallest gesture can change someone's day or their life. Alina played an equally vital role, using her expertise to refine the workshops and develop new tools for teaching de-escalation. Together, they created online modules, instructional videos, and even a podcast called Bridging Divides, which featured interviews with experts in psychology, sociology, and conflict resolution. The podcast quickly gained traction, becoming a go-to resource for anyone seeking guidance on fostering unity in divided times. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of James' actions continued to touch lives in unexpected ways. Teachers who attended the workshops reported fewer disciplinary issues in classrooms after implementing the techniques they learned. Police departments saw improved relationships with local communities as officers embraced empathy-driven approaches to law enforcement. Even businesses adopted elements of the program, training employees to handle customer complaints with patience and respect. Stories of transformation flooded social media, tagged with #UnityInAction, creating a virtual tapestry of hope and progress. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt within James himself. Though he remained humble, he couldn't deny the weight of what he'd accomplished. He thought back to the countless hours spent standing guard outside the palace, feeling like a small cog in a vast machine. Now he realized that his presence had always mattered, not just as a symbol of authority, but as a human being capable of inspiring others. His decision to remain calm when faced with hatred hadn't just diffused one tense situation. It had sparked a chain reaction of positivity that reached far beyond anything he could have imagined. Victor Langley, however, faded further into obscurity. After losing his job and retreating from public view, he became a footnote in the larger narrative of compassion and resilience. Some speculated that he might have moved away or changed his name to escape the shame of his actions. Others believed he was forced to confront the consequences of his behavior, possibly even seeking help to address the deep-seated prejudices that had driven him to antagonize James in the first place. Whatever the truth, Victor served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked hostility and the power of redemption if one chooses to seek it. As months turned into years, UnityInAction grew into a nonprofit organization dedicated to bridging gaps between communities and authority figures. With funding from donors and grants, James and Alina expanded their reach, partnering with schools, governments, and NGOs to tackle systemic issues like racism, inequality, and mistrust. They launched mentorship programs, connecting young people with role models who embodied the values of empathy and integrity. They also organize annual summits, bringing together leaders from diverse fields to collaborate on innovative solutions to societal challenges. Through it all, James never forgot his roots. Despite his growing fame, he continued to serve as a royal guard, finding comfort in the routine and discipline of his original role. To him, guarding the palace wasn't just about protecting the historic building. It was about safeguarding the ideals it represented: tradition, honor, and unity. And every time he stood at his post, he carried with him the knowledge that his work extended far beyond the stone walls behind him. The journey hadn't been easy. There were long days, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt when James wondered if he was making a difference. But then he'd receive a letter from a stranger thanking him for changing their perspective, or see a child smile during a workshop activity, and he'd know the effort was worth it. In those moments, he understood that the legacy of kindness isn't measured in headlines or awards. It's found in the hearts of those whose lives are touched along the way. Years passed, and the legacy of UnityInAction continued to grow, weaving itself into the fabric of communities worldwide. What had started as a single act of compassion by Corporal James Harrington had blossomed into a global movement that transcended borders, cultures, and languages. The principles of empathy, patience, and understanding became guiding lights for countless individuals who sought to make their corner of the world a little brighter. James, now in his late 40s, stood on the steps of an international conference hall, overlooking the sea of faces gathered for the annual Unity Summit. Attendees from over 50 countries filled the space, each carrying stories of how they had applied the lessons of de-escalation and kindness in their own lives. Some were teachers who had transformed chaotic classrooms into havens of learning. Others were police officers who had rebuilt trust with communities once torn apart by mistrust. Still others were everyday citizens, parents, neighbors, friends, who had chosen to respond to hostility with humanity. As James took the stage to deliver the closing remarks, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. "When I first crouched down to calm that dog," he began, his voice steady but warm, "I didn't think about changing the world. I just wanted to do what was right in that moment. But here we are today, standing together because so many of you have taken that same spirit and carried it forward." He paused, scanning the crowd before continuing. "Kindness isn't complicated. It's simple. It's choosing to listen instead of argue. It's seeing someone else's pain and acknowledging it. It's deciding that hate doesn't get the last word. And while it may seem small, those choices add up. They create waves of change that can travel farther than we ever imagined." The audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet as one. For James, this moment wasn't just validation of his efforts. It was proof that collective action could overcome even the deepest divides. He thought back to the square where it all began, the angry man, the snarling dog, the frightened crowd, and marveled at how far they'd come since then. Back home, James remained a beloved figure both inside and outside the palace walls. Though age had brought gray streaks to his hair and a slight stiffness to his posture, his presence still commanded respect. Young recruits often approached him for advice, eager to learn not only about military discipline, but also about navigating life's challenges with grace. "You don't need to be perfect," he would tell them. "You just need to try, to show up, stay calm, and care enough to make a difference." Dr. Elena Carter, now retired, looked back on their partnership with pride. Together, she and James had authored several books detailing the techniques and philosophies behind unity in action. These publications reached classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms, ensuring that future generations would inherit tools for fostering peace. One book, titled Strength in Compassion, became required reading in leadership courses worldwide, cementing its place as a timeless guide for resolving conflict. The nonprofit organization thrived under new leadership, with James serving as its honorary chairperson. Its programs expanded to include initiatives addressing climate justice, mental health awareness, and youth empowerment. Schools adopted curricula based on unity and action principles, teaching children the value of cooperation and mutual respect from an early age. Even businesses integrated these teachings into workplace culture, prioritizing emotional intelligence alongside productivity. On quiet evenings, James liked to walk through the city square where it all began. Tourists still gathered there, snapping photos and marveling at the grandeur of the palace. Occasionally, someone would recognize him. A child clutching the storybook about his life, or an adult recalling how his actions had inspired them years ago. Each encounter reminded him that the work was never truly finished. There would always be moments of tension, acts of hatred, and opportunities to choose kindness instead. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the cobblestones, James stopped near the spot where Victor's dog had once lunged at him. He smiled softly, remembering the day that changed everything. Not because of the chaos it brought, but because of the hope it ignited. A young girl playing nearby ran up to him, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you the kind guard?" she asked innocently. James chuckled, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "I suppose I am," he replied gently. "But you know, anyone can be kind if they choose to be." Her smile lit up the fading twilight, and James felt a renewed surge of purpose. The world was imperfect, yes, but within every person lay the potential to bridge divides, heal wounds, and build connections. All it took was one moment, one choice, one